This video brings together the darkest stories from the world of Edgar Allan Poe, where fear, despair, and the raw instinct to survive are stripped down to their most human form. If you enjoy stories that dive deep into the mind and expose the cold truth of human nature, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, and come with me into our first chapter, where death does not arrive with a scream, but with a slow, suffocating silence that makes the human heart tremble. And before we begin, take a slow breath and steady yourself, because the story you're about to hear is not just about torture or darkness, but about that moment when a person is forced to confront themselves, stripped of everything except fear and the will to live. I want to tell you about that moment. The moment when everything familiar disappears and all that remains is a fragile heartbeat inside a terrified body. And the story begins like this. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't tell the ceiling from the floor. The darkness was so thick it felt alive, pressing against my lungs, stealing every breath. In that instant, I understood that people don't fear death as much as they fear being left truly alone. I lay on the cold stone floor, my hands trembling so violently I couldn't tell where fear ended and my heartbeat began. The only memory left in my mind was the distant courtroom, the faceless judges, their voices cold and without a hint of mercy. As my fingers brushed across the ground, I felt its rough, uneven surface. This wasn't an ordinary room. It was a punishment crafted to break a person from the inside out. In the choking darkness, I crawled forward until suddenly my hand slipped into a vast, empty space. It wasn't just a pit. It felt like the open mouth of the darkness itself, waiting patiently for me to fall in. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through my chest. Then I heard it, the first sound in that silent tomb, a soft metallic breath, slow and steady, as if death itself were inhaling above me. As my eyes adjusted to the faintest sliver of light, I saw it, a massive blade hanging from a long rope, swinging like the pendulum of time itself. Each slow arc brought it a little lower, a little closer. The glint of steel flashed like a whispered warning, and I found myself wondering which was worse, the moment of death or the agony of watching it come closer, inch by inch. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to let the fear swallow me whole. But thoughts of the people I loved, the life I once had, forced me to cling to the thin thread of hope. Even if the world had abandoned me in this chamber, I refused to abandon myself. I watched the blade's rhythm, calculating every breath, every second, every chance. The ropes cut into my skin as I struggled, the pain sharp enough to make me want to scream. But the scream never reached my throat. Using crumbs scattered on my body, I lured hungry rats to gnaw through the ropes. And just as the blade brushed the fabric of my clothes, I rolled away, escaping death by a heartbeat. But I had no time to celebrate. The walls began to heat up, glowing red, inching inward like a pair of giant hands, ready to crush me into the pit. I pushed back, step by step, driven only by that tiny spark of will that refused to die. And just when the edge of the abyss kissed the tip of my toes, a burst of bright light flooded the chamber. Voices shouted, hands reached out and pulled me away from the brink. In that moment, I realized something simple and painfully human. Sometimes people are saved not because they are strong, but because someone, somewhere, still believes they shouldn't vanish from this world just yet. For as long as people have feared death, there has always been one terror that reaches even deeper: the horror of waking up in darkness and realizing the world has mistaken you for a corpse. Welcome to the second chapter in our journey through Edgar Allan Poe's darkest stories, where the line between life and death is so thin that one misplaced breath can send a human soul into absolute despair. If you are listening right now, leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and come with me into a tale that, even today, is whispered with a shiver. I lived with a strange condition, one that froze my body into a motionless shell, leaving me as stiff and silent as the dead, and that illness planted in my mind a fear I could never escape. I heard stories, real ones, about storms that forced families to bury people too quickly, about victims lowered into the earth while their faint heartbeat still begged for another chance, about survivors who clawed their way out of coffins only to realize no one had heard them calling. Each story cut deeper into my mind, making me afraid to fall asleep, afraid that my next deep breath might be my last as a living man. I prepared for everything, from alarm bells beside my bed to doors left open at night, hoping that if the illness struck again, someone would notice I was still alive. But no preparation could save me from the night it happened. I woke in total darkness, thick and heavy like damp soil pressed against my face, and the space around me was so tight that my breath bounced back, carrying the smell of old wood, dust, and something colder, something belonging to the dead. I reached upward, and my fingertips struck solid wood only inches above my face. In that moment, I wasn't human anymore. I was fear, pure and breathing. I tried to call out, but my throat was dry, and the sound escaped me like a faint gust of wind. My heartbeat pounded so violently it felt like the coffin itself was shaking. The thought that haunted me was not the pain of dying, but the silence of it, knowing that no one on earth would ever realize I was still alive beneath this crushing darkness. I scraped at the wood, feeling splinters fall onto my chest, imagining my body lying here for days until the last bit of air was gone. But then something shifted, a sound, not the cracking of wood but the rush of wind, the murmur of voices, the unmistakable noise of life. A burst of light hit me so suddenly I had to close my eyes, and when I opened them again, I saw faces staring down at me, living faces, warm with concern. And only then did I understand. I wasn't in a coffin at all. I was lying in the cramped hull of a small boat that had drifted into darkness. That night taught me something I never forgot. Sometimes it isn't death that buries us. It's our own imagination, digging a grave inside our mind long before our body ever touches the ground. And from the moment I crawled out of that darkness, I knew I would live differently, because a person only truly understands how much they want to live when they have once believed they were already being buried alive. From the very beginning of my life, I understood something most people only realize much later, that a person never walks alone, not truly, because somewhere in the quiet corners of our heart, there is always another version of ourselves, watching, whispering, questioning every choice we make. And that brings us into the third chapter of this series, the story of William Wilson, a man who spent his entire life wondering if the figure following him was an enemy, a warning, or a part of himself he was too afraid to face. If you are listening right now, tell me where you are tuning in from, and ask yourself this. Have you ever felt someone staring at you when no one was there? Have you ever sensed that your own conscience had a shape, a face, and a heartbeat? I grew up in an old boarding school where the walls held more secrets than the children inside it. The halls were long, cold, echoing with a strange emptiness, and I often felt the building itself was alive, listening to us, judging us. And then one day, I met him, the boy with my name, my age, my voice, my movements. Was it coincidence or something more unsettling? Why did he mirror me so perfectly, down to the way I breathed when I was nervous? At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that maybe every school had a boy like him, someone who resembled you just enough to make you uncomfortable. But then I began to notice the pattern. Every time I was about to stray, to lie, to cheat, to let my worst impulses take over, he appeared, standing in a doorway, sitting in a chair beside mine, watching with a calm stillness that felt heavier than any punishment. Who was he to judge me? Why did he always show up at the exact moment I wanted to step across the line? Was he trying to stop me? Or was he trying to show me who I truly was beneath the masks I wore? When I finally left that school behind, I thought I would leave him behind too. But have you ever tried to run from something that lives inside your own reflection? No matter where I went, he followed. In crowded rooms, in dark corridors, in mirrors when I thought I was alone. Sometimes I caught his face for only a second, sometimes longer. And each time I felt my heart tighten with the same question. Is he haunting me, or am I haunting myself? As the years went on, I drifted into a life of indulgence and recklessness. Perhaps part of me wanted to drown out that quiet voice of conscience. Perhaps I wanted to prove that I was in control. Yet every time I sank deeper into my worst decisions, he appeared again. Why would he not let me fall? Why did he care? Was he trying to save me, or simply remind me that I was running out of chances? Everything reached a breaking point on a night filled with wine, noise, and anger. In a room glowing with red candlelight, I finally confronted him. The other William Wilson, the shadow with my eyes, my breath, my soul. And in a violent moment of rage, I struck him. I watched him fall, convinced that I had finally freed myself. But then I looked into the mirror, my blood, my face, my wounds, and in that horrifying instant, I understood. I had not destroyed a rival. I had destroyed the last piece of myself that was still trying to be good. Have you ever wondered what remains of us when we silence the only voice that still believes we can change? In that room, as the truth closed in on me, I realized something every human eventually faces. You can run from others. You can lie to the world. But you cannot escape yourself. And sometimes, in trying to kill the better version of who we could have been, we bury the only part of us that was keeping us human at all. Have you ever felt that something small, something you should be able to ignore, somehow slips into your mind and refuses to let go, keeping you awake at night, tightening around your thoughts until you can no longer breathe like a normal person? Welcome to Chapter 4, The Telltale Heart, a story where terror does not come from monsters or ghosts, but from the human heart when it begins to lose its grip on reason. If you are listening, leave a comment and tell me where you are tuning in from, and ask yourself this. Have you ever been afraid of something that made no sense? Afraid to the point that it stripped away the best parts of who you were? I once lived with an old man, gentle and kind, a man who had never wronged me, never raised his voice, never hurt me in any way. And yet, strangely, I could not bear the sight of his eye. It was not a normal eye, but a pale, cold, clouded gaze that felt like a vulture watching me, searching through the shadows inside my chest. Why did one eye frighten me so deeply? Was it the eye itself, or was I terrified of what it forced me to see within myself? Night after night, I watched him. I studied the rise and fall of his breath, the faint rustle of his blanket, the flicker of light slipping through the door. I would stand in the darkness for hours, waiting, listening, wondering if the eye was open or closed, and questioning whether my fear was madness or warning. Then one night he opened his eyes, and that gaze fell directly upon me, and something inside me snapped. Time seemed to split in half. The room shrank around us, and I heard his heartbeat. Soft at first, but to me it sounded like a drum echoing through a courtroom, louder, faster, more desperate with every passing second. Was that his heart, or my own fear pounding against my ribs, begging me to stop before I crossed a line I could never step back from? In a sudden rush of panic, I acted. I silenced that heartbeat, buried his body beneath the floorboards, and told myself it was over, that the fear would finally disappear. But fear does not vanish. It hides. And when the police came, when they sat in the room making small talk, when everything seemed calm, that sound returned. The heartbeat, louder, sharper, insistent. Was it real? Why could no one else hear it? Or was the truth simply no longer willing to stay buried beneath the wood? I stood there trembling as sweat slid down my spine, and the pounding grew until it filled every corner of the room, every corner of my mind. And in that moment, I understood. The sound was not his heart. It was mine. The sound of guilt pounding against the walls of my chest, demanding to be heard. And I confessed, not because they found evidence, but because I could no longer bear the weight of that beating, a beating that reminded me, as it reminds all of us, that no matter how deeply we hide the truth, it will always find a way to rise to the surface. Have you ever wondered how deeply a person must be wounded to spend years holding on to a single moment of revenge? And in that long, dark journey, do they lose their humanity piece by piece, or does the pain simply smother every softer part of their soul? This is Chapter 5, The Cask of Amontillado, a story not only about a murder planned with chilling precision, but also a warning about the price people pay when pride is pushed to its breaking point. I have always believed that no insult is worth trading away an entire human soul. Yet Montresor, the man telling this story, carried a bitterness so deep that silence became his only way to contain it. We never learn exactly what Fortunato did to him, but sometimes the smallest wounds cut the deepest, especially when they strike at a person's dignity. Montresor did not shout or fight or confront him. Instead, he chose something colder, a smile, a kind tone, the appearance of friendship, all while quietly building a plan in the shadows. On the night of the carnival, when the city drowned itself in wine and music, Montresor approached Fortunato with the perfect bait, a rare Amontillado wine. And Fortunato, fueled by pride in his own refined taste, followed willingly, never imagining he was walking beside a man who had already decided his fate. People are always vulnerable to flattery when it touches their vanity, and Fortunato was no exception. He followed Montresor down the stone steps into the catacombs, where cold air clung to their skin and the narrow walls felt alive with the sighs of the forgotten dead. Fortunato coughed violently as the dampness hit his lungs, yet he pushed forward, clinging to his pride as if it were a shield. Montresor said very little, but sometimes silence is the clearest sign that something terrible is about to happen. When they reached the end of the passage, where there was no way out, Montresor acted. He chained Fortunato to the wall with a speed that came not from anger, but from a decision made long ago. At first, Fortunato laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the laughter dissolved into fear when he saw Montresor lifting the first brick. Every new layer of bricks dimmed the remaining sliver of light, and Fortunato's pleas softened, then cracked, then faded into a trembling breath. Montresor did not stop. Each brick he placed felt like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to a living man, but to someone who had surrendered completely to his own darkness. Did Montresor feel even a moment of doubt, or had revenge frozen his heart long before that night? When the final brick sealed the wall, the darkness swallowed Fortunato, leaving nothing but silence, the kind of silence that lingers for decades. Montresor walked away with a calmness that was almost frightening, and for 50 years no one discovered the truth. But the question remains, can a person truly bury another soul without burying a part of themselves as well? Perhaps the real punishment is not the crime, but the echo it leaves inside the mind of the one who committed it, an echo that no amount of time can ever truly silence. There are houses built not only from stone and wood, but from loneliness, grief, and secrets so old that time itself refuses to touch them. And there are relationships that bind two people together not because of love, but because their souls have grown too tired to live apart. Chapter 7, The Fall of the House of Usher, is the story of a home rotting from the inside and a family collapsing under the weight of their own hearts, a story that makes you wonder whether death is sometimes the only release for those trapped in the darkness of their own existence. I arrived at the Usher mansion on a gray day when the sky hung low like a warning and the still lake before the gate looked like the unblinking eye of someone close to death. Roderick Usher, my childhood friend, had written to me in desperation. His handwriting trembled on the page as if each word had been forced out through fear. The moment I stepped inside, I understood that this was no ordinary house. It felt alive, or rather, half alive, like a body slowly giving up. Cracks split the walls. The air carried a chill that did not come from weather, but from something deeper, and the long hallway stretched before me like a dream you want to wake from but cannot escape. Roderick appeared ghost-like, his skin pale, his eyes sunk deep with exhaustion, his hands trembling as though he were clinging to the last threads of his sanity. He told me the house was killing him, that every whisper of wind, every dim flicker of light, every small echo in the hall pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. I did not know whether it was illness or the slow starvation of a soul left alone too long. But what unsettled me more was Madeline, his sister, moving silently through the house like a spirit made of breath and sorrow. Her beauty was fragile, drained of color, as if she were fading out of existence with each passing day. They barely spoke to each other, yet something unspoken bound them, something heavy and haunting, as if their fates were braided together so tightly that the fall of one would drag the other down. Then came the day Roderick told me Madeline had died. We carried her to the vault beneath the house, laying her in a heavy coffin and sealing it shut in a silence that felt more like fear than grief. But when I looked at her face, still warm with a trace of life, her lips holding the faintest shade of color, a cold certainty curled inside me. Something was wrong, something terrible. The days that followed grew stranger. The house felt heavier, as if the walls were listening. At night I heard footsteps, soft breathing, distant knocks echoing through the floors. Roderick no longer slept. He stared at the door with wild eyes and whispered that Madeline was still here, that we had buried her alive, that she was walking through the hallways searching for him, or perhaps searching for justice. I wanted to believe it was only his mind unraveling, but even I could no longer ignore the sounds, the faint cries, the muffled beating as if a heart beneath the floorboards refused to stop. Then came the storm. Thunder ripped through the sky. The house shook as if trying to break free of its own curse. Roderick burst into my room, his face drained of all color, screaming that Madeline was coming, that she had escaped the coffin we forced upon her. And before I could speak, the door flew open. Madeline stood there, covered in blood, her eyes wide with a pain beyond words, her body trembling with the last strength of a heart betrayed. She staggered forward and collapsed onto Roderick, and in that final moment, I understood. She had not come to kill him. She had come because they were bound in a way neither life nor death could sever. Their doom was shared. Their fate was one. They died in each other's arms, not as enemies, but as two souls who had carried the same curse since birth. I fled the house as the ground began to quake, the walls splitting open like a wound too long ignored. Stone crashed, dust rose, and when I turned back, the house of Usher crumbled into the dark lake, swallowed whole as if the earth itself had been waiting for the moment it could erase the last trace of their suffering. And I realized then that sometimes destruction is not cruelty, but mercy, the only way for a haunted soul to finally be freed from a lifetime of shadows. There are moments in life when a person must face the harshest truth of all, that no matter how wealthy you are, how powerful you believe yourself to be, or how many walls you build around your world, you cannot stop death when it decides to call your name. Chapter 8, The Mask of the Red Death, tells the story of a prince who believed he could outrun fate by hiding inside beauty, music, and the illusion of safety, only to learn that death does not knock. It enters like a guest no one invited, but no one can keep out. When the Red Death swept across the land, leaving fever, crimson stains, and terror in its wake, Prince Prospero fled from the suffering outside. He gathered the wealthy, the gifted, the people he believed mattered enough to save, and locked them inside an elaborate abbey with iron walls so thick that not even a breath of death, he thought, could pass through. Inside this sanctuary of luxury, he held endless feasts, dazzling masquerades lit by 1,000 candles, music rising loud enough to drown out the cries beyond the gate. But beneath the laughter lay a question no one dared to speak. Can joy ever silence the footsteps of the inevitable? The grand masquerade took place in 7 connected rooms, each one glowing with its own haunting color, like the chapters of a life. Blue, purple, green, orange, white, violet, and finally the black and blood-red chamber, where a great ebony clock struck the passing hours with a chime so deep that every conversation fell silent, as if time itself was reminding them of what they were trying so desperately to forget. And then, in the middle of the night, as the guests swayed with wine and music, a new figure appeared. No one knew where he came from. No one had invited him. He wore a funeral shroud, pale and ghostly, with a mask shaped like the face of a dying man, and across his chest a dark crimson stain, the mark of the Red Death itself. A heavy stillness smothered the room. Prospero felt not fear at first, but rage, the rage of a man who believed someone had dared mock the absolute control he thought he possessed. He chased the stranger through the colored rooms, the echo of his footsteps beating like the battle between pride and truth. But when he reached the final chamber, the black and red one, where shadows merged with the blood-colored light, he faced the figure and saw the terrible truth. There was no man behind the mask. There was no body, no face, no soul, only the hollow presence of death itself. Prospero collapsed in an instant, like a candle blown out by a cold wind. The guests rushed forward, but when they touched the costume, they found nothing inside. One by one they fell, each breath slipping away as quietly as a final note in a song they could no longer remember. By dawn, the abbey was silent, stripped of music, laughter, and illusion. The wealth, the pride, the walls, the masks, all vanished into emptiness. Only the Red Death remained, walking calmly among the ruins of everything humans built, to deny the truth that death is the only guest who never waits outside the door. There are moments in life when the world reminds us how small we truly are, how fragile a human body becomes in the hands of nature, and how a single choice can mean the difference between life and oblivion. Chapter 9, A Descent into the Maelstrom, is the story of a fisherman who came face to face with a force so powerful that even memory trembles when he speaks of it. He was once a strong man, weathered by storms and hardened by years at sea, living alongside his brothers among steep cliffs and restless tides. The ocean was not an enemy to him, but a companion, a vast and unpredictable friend he thought he understood. But can anyone truly believe they understand the sea? The night everything changed began with a sky that looked torn open, black clouds racing across the horizon as if trying to outrun something unspeakable. Against his better judgment, the man set sail with his brothers, drawn by the promise of a full catch before the storm could break. But storms do not wait for human plans. The winds rose like a scream, the waves curled higher than houses, and before they could turn back, the sea seized their small boat and hurled it toward the one place no sailor ever wanted to see, the great whirlpool known as the Maelstrom. As the vessel spun toward the churning abyss, time seemed to stretch thin, balancing between terror and surrender. The whirlpool roared like a living creature, its walls made of water twisting downward into a darkness that felt bottomless. He watched as his brothers clung to the boat, their faces pale with the understanding that no strength, no prayer could stop what was coming. And yet, in that moment, when most men would shut their eyes and wait for the end, he found himself studying the chaos, searching for patterns, for a sliver of logic inside the madness. He noticed that not everything was pulled into the depths at the same speed. Large objects sank faster, small and hollow ones danced near the surface. Was survival possible, even here? Could a mind stay calm while the universe collapsed around it? With a courage born not from bravery, but from pure instinct, he let go of the boat and grabbed hold of a floating barrel, trusting the strange rhythm he had seen. His brothers cried out, but within seconds their voices were swallowed by the vortex. He was flung around the whirlpool like a leaf caught in a storm, his body bruised, lungs burning, yet the barrel kept him near the outer circle, just far enough from the deadly pull at its heart. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time has no meaning inside a monster made of water and gravity. At last, the storm loosened its grip, the whirlpool slowed, and the sea spat him out like something it no longer cared to keep. He drifted until a passing boat pulled him aboard, but the man they rescued was no longer the same. His hair had turned white in a single night, his face carved by fear and awe, as if the maelstrom had reached into his soul and changed its shape. He survived, but survival came at a cost. He lost his brothers, his strength, and his certainty about the world. Yet he gained something else, a truth as deep as the whirlpool itself, that sometimes the only path through terror is not to fight the storm, but to understand it, to move with it, to trust that life can be found even on the edge of destruction. And when he tells his story, his voice trembles, not from fear, but from the memory of a night when he learned how thin the line between life and death can truly be.